Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome back. Let me first start by briefly reviewing where we left off before the spring break. We introduced the idea of the economy, you remember, right? We talked about the economy as the system that does what? What is the economy? Economy is a system. What does it do?
Resources.
That's the one. It takes resources and transforms them into goods and services, right? Sometimes economy is healthy, sometimes it's less healthy, depending on how fast it manages to increase production of goods and services. But the fact is, regardless of whether economy is healthy or not healthy, you have really good economies that are, generally speaking, good at transforming resources into goods and services, such as our economy. Even at its worst, when our economy is not healthy, it still does a much better job than many other economies around the world. Then you have other economies around the world that may have a lot of resources, yet are really bad at transforming those resources into goods and services. And that difference between good economies that are capable of producing a lot of goods and services out of their resources and the economies that are not capable of doing that, that difference is called the efficiency. Exactly. Right? The efficiency. And this course, microeconomics, is all about explaining where efficiency comes from and efficiency of the economy comes from and what affects it. Why do we need to know that stuff? Why is it important to know where efficiency comes from and what affects it? Who cares? Do you care? Maybe not quite. Why should you care? Well, does your life in any way depend on the efficiency/inefficiency of the economy?
Yes.
Absolutely. If you want to live in a cool, vibrant, awesome America and realize your American dream, you better live in an America that has an efficient economy, right? So efficiency of the economy is all important. Now, is efficiency given to us by providence? Is it a manifest destiny of America to be efficient economy?
No.
No, our efficiency is very much man-made, human-made, okay? And just as we make our economy efficient, we may end up making our economy inefficient if we don't know what we're doing, right? Among things that have profound impact on efficiency are policies, various policies of the government. And as we will see as a result of this analysis, you will see that some policies cause a lot more inefficiency than others. Why do you guys have to know how efficiency of markets is affected by different policies? Because this is a democracy and you guys are in charge of your government. You decide what policies are implemented. And if you elect incompetent leaders because you don't know what really matters, then you can rely on the fact that incompetent leaders will implement inefficient policies and ruin the American economy for you, right? How do we know that that's what would happen? How do we know it's a real danger? Because it happened before, of course. We've seen it happen. So that's why it matters. In other words, it's not because it's just cool to look at, it's of utmost practicality. So we're basically on a quest to explain efficiency and see what impacts it. But we already said there is no way to see the source of efficiency on the surface of the economy, looking at the economy as a whole, like we did in macroeconomics. Here, in order to find the source of efficiency, we actually have to dig a lot deeper, right? Just how deep do we have to dig to start finding the sources of efficiency? Well, we have to dig into the smallest constituent part, smallest building blocks of the market economy. What is the smallest building block? What is the single cell of which the entire organism of our economy is comprised? It is a market for an individual good or an individual service, right? In other words, one market. And in the last class, we made progress in explaining what constitutes a market, right? So in the marketplace is a place where two groups of people interact. Who are those people?
Buyers.
Buyers on
And
one side
producer.
and producers, absolutely. Now, buyers' behavior can be conveniently summarized by summing up all those things that determine quantity demanded. You remember? And we said quantity demanded depends,
Price.
or is a demand function of many things, right?
Yes.
Price of the good itself, right?
Income.
Income, absolutely.
Taste.
Tastes, preferences, absolutely.
A population.
Population, number of buyers, absolutely. Prices of other goods, perhaps?
Yes.
Does your demand for a truck depend on the price of gas?
Yes.
Absolutely good, right? So all of those things determine just how much in terms of goods and services we're buying, or how much of a good are we gonna buy, are we gonna demand. Now, as simplified as that statement is, it's still pretty lengthy and inconvenient to work with. This is why we are trying to condense all that information into a simple graph. But a simple graph has only two axes, so we have to pick two variables to put on those axes. Which two variables
Price.
did we pick? First of all, we picked obviously the quantity demanded,
Supply.
which is what we demand. We're still talking about demand, right? So quantity, which is what we're after. We're trying to explain the quantity we're demanding, right? And of course, on the other axis, we put one of those many variables, the one we consider the single most important one, and that is the price, as you said. And in that space, price, quantity space, demand can then be captured by means of a downward sloping demand curve, right? What does the downward sloping demand curve tell you? If you had to describe this in words, how would you do it? Translate this picture into English. Say it very loud.
Oh man. As the price is decreasing, the quantity demanded is increasing.
Exactly. Do you want to finish this class?
No, you
still have your
Yeah.
you still have your tangerines to I understand. Okay, so no, absolutely. As the price of the good increases, quantity demanding decreases, and vice versa, right? So there's this inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. Does it have to be that way? Is there such a thing as upward sloping demand? Is it possible that as the price of something rises, we actually, like stocks, right? Is it true that people want more of Apple stock now that it sells for how much? 500, 600 a share? Way back when, more than a decade ago, it was selling for something like $7, $8 a share. Back then, nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Today, at hundreds of dollars per share, people can't get enough of it. Is that a good example of an upward sloping demand?
Yes.
Where price goes up, quantity demanded rises.
Yeah.
One would think so. But let's ask a question. Why is it that today people want to buy a lot of shares of Apple stock? Is it really because it's so expensive?
In hopes
No,
that it will
they're-
increase more.
Huh?
No, because the future.
Oh, in other words, people are buying it today for $500 or $600 a share, not because it is $500 or $600, but because they expect that the price will
Will go
rise
up.
further.
Yeah.
Why didn't people want to buy it at $8 a share?
So then I think it'd be successful.
Because they did not expect that price to rise.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're thinking of buying an $8 stock, and you don't expect it to rise, you're not going to buy because it doesn't really feel that cheap. Do you understand? I mean, how's that a good deal if it's not going to rise? Whereas if a stock is $500 or $600 and you expect it to go to $900, it feels like a good deal, right? In other words, people are buying that stock now at $500 or $600 not because it's expensive, but because it feels cheap, right? Compared to what it's going to be in months or possibly years. That makes sense? There you go. In other words, what drives demand for stocks when they're rising, it is not the fact that they're expensive, it is that we expect. So it's not the price that drives it, it is expectations. Which of course you remember was another of those factors. Remember? Expectations. In other words, price of stock relates to quantity demanded just like this, like demand for any other good or service. If you see demand for stock rising together with price, it is not because price is rising, it is because expectations are improving. What does it mean? If this is demand for Apple, and then suddenly expectations improve, what happens to that demand curve? It shifts. In which direction? What does it mean for demand to increase? It shifts in which direction? To the right. To the right. Why does shift to the right mean increase? Because typically increase means going up, right? Here an increase is shift to the right. Why? Exactly. Because remember, demand is defined as quantity of something people are willing and able to buy. Quantity. Where's the quantity in this graph? On the horizontal axis. And quantity increases to the right. That makes sense? So increase in demand, increase in quantity people are willing and able to buy means shift to the right. So as we expect Apple to perform better in the future, the entire demand curve shifts to the right. That makes sense? Very good. So that's what we learned in the last class, right? But of course, that alone doesn't tell you the price. Because price is not determined by demand alone. What's the other side of the market, the other component you need to be able to explain the price of a good or service? Supply, of course. There are suppliers. Now, suppliers or firms, their behavior is captured in terms of the supply curve, right? Which reflects a direct relationship between the price and quantity supplied. And of course, together, demand and supply determine the market price and market quantity. And we know that market price and market quantity are determined by the, use the word, equilibrium. Exactly. So we know that, what is equilibrium again? What is equilibrium? C'est là. Where demand and supply meet is a good intuitive way to describe what you mean. Let's try and be more specific. This is a market. In the market, we're interested in price and in quantity, right? So say exactly the same thing you just said, except use the words quantity and price. So what is equilibrium?
It's the intersection.
You didn't use the word price or quantity. You mean it well.
It's the intersection where the
where the demand and the supply meet.
Here's the deal, guys. Your intuition is correct, only you are thinking in terms of geometry. If this was a geometry class, I tell you, spot on. Okay? If this is a geometry class, we have two curves, and you tell me, oh, that's an intersection of those two curves. Yes, you're right. But this is not a geometry class. This is an econ class. We're talking about quantity and about price. So equilibrium is not an intersection. Equilibrium is certain price and certain quantity, right? So once again, what is equilibrium? Equilibrium are these two numbers, guys. They may be determined by that intersection. But equilibrium really is the price and the quantity. What is so special about this particular price and this particular quantity? Here's what's so special. This is the only price at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Correct? And since this is the only price at which this is true, we call that very special price an equilibrium price, right? And since at this equilibrium price, and only at this equilibrium price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, what do we call this very special quantity? The equilibrium quantity. Exactly. So, equilibrium in the market, if you think of it as an intersection or where demand and supply meet, it's not a bad intuition. But it's really not what equilibrium is. Equilibrium is equilibrium price at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied equals equilibrium quantity. That makes sense? That's equilibrium. Why is it important? Why am I being so picky about the words? Because today I'm going to assign homework number 1, and on that homework number 1, you finally are going to be able to actually solve for equilibrium. And when I tell you solve for equilibrium, I'm not asking that you show me a point. You see, I'm asking that you solve for equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. That makes sense? Very good. Very good. In other words, this graph, this concept of demand and supply, help us understand how prices and quantities in the markets are established. Now, how do we know that that's the way it really works? Because we see it happen all the time. Okay? Now, you might, of course, say, yeah, I've been to Whole Foods market, or I've been to a grocery store, which is a market with groceries, right? And I've never seen anything looking like this anywhere on the shelf. So how do we know that this is really somehow an approximation of what's happening in the markets? What do you think? Well, we test it. We're asking, if this is the way we think of markets, can we make meaningful predictions about what's happening? For example, demand, supply, equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. If American economy improves, what do you think happens to demand for new cars? Rises. Or increases. When demand increases, where does it shift? To the right or to the left?
Right.
It shifts to the left, right. If it shifts to the right, this is going to be the new demand. What can you tell me about the market price of new cars and quantity of new cars produced and sold?
It will go up.
Prices will rise to new equilibrium price, and quantity will increase to new equilibrium quantity QE prime. That makes sense? So this model, we can call it a model or a concept, helps us predict what will happen to prices and quantities. Alternatively, we used this concept in the last class, if you remember, to explain what happened to prices of computers or laptops over the period of last 10, 15 years, right? How did we go about that explanation? Demand, supply, equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. How did the market with laptops change over last 10, 15 years? First of all, what do you think happened to demand for laptops?
Increase.
Definitely increased because we grew richer and we need those laptops more. They're integrated into our lives and whatnot, right? So demand definitely increased from D to D prime. But if this is what happened, we see that quantity of laptops increased, which is true, right? Laptops are everywhere in every store, but also price of laptops significantly increased. Is that what happened? Are laptops today more expensive than they were 10 years ago? Not that you have a reason to remember, but no, they're definitely cheaper. Well, does it mean we should scrap this model, we should scrap this analysis because it gives us incorrect prediction? No, in fact, increase in demand is not the only change that took place. What else has changed in the marketplace for laptops over the last however many years?
It's improved.
Technology has tremendously improved, right? Now when technology improves, which of the two curves shifts? Supply. Which direction? To the right. Absolutely. So as the supply shifts to the right, now by the way, did technology improve tremendously or just a tad over the last 15 years? Tremendous improvement in technology. So supply actually shifted to the right really, really far, right? So we have a shift in demand, but we have a ginormous shift in supply. And as a result, with a new demand and a new supply, where's the new equilibrium quantity of laptops? Over here, right? So now we're flooded with laptops. 15 years ago, they were relatively rare. Now, they're commonplace. Everybody's got one, right? Meanwhile, what happened to equilibrium price of laptops? It came down, right? So, does this very simple analytical tool, we call it supply-demand diagram, does it give us meaningful predictions that seem to correspond to what we really observe in real life? What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, it has been unbeatable for over 100 years. It is one of the most solid, robust, and useful analytical tools in all of social science for over a century. It is absolutely amazing what the power of this little thing is. Now, of course, we're not ending there. Remember, the purpose why we introduced this supply and demand diagram is to have a meaningful tool to analyze a single market on our quest to discover the secret of what? Efficiency. Exactly. Efficiency. Exactly. So, this is just the beginning. Okay, guys. So this is how far we got in the last class, right? We introduced supply, demand, equilibrium, and we played with it a little bit to show how the graph works. Do you have any questions about it right now? Everybody okay? Cool. Let me clean up. And let's make the first step towards a quantitative analysis. So far, everything we were talking about is qualitative. In other words, price goes up or down, quantity increases or decreases, right? Qualitatively speaking. Now, we're going to start actually calculating our answers. It means deriving quantitative answers in terms of numbers. Why do you think that's important? I don't remember who that was, but a major noted scientist in the 20th century pointed out that until you can measure what you're talking about, you really don't know what you're talking about. And I really like it. It sounds very simple, but it's very deep. And so what we're really going to develop is a very basic method of actually calculating our answers, and it will pay off handsomely. It will be associated with crunching numbers. Generally speaking, crunching numbers is boring, right? The nice thing is, crunching numbers in this class is going to be extremely simple. And you're going to be doing it enough that it's going to become routine, second nature to you. Still boring, but inconsequential, okay? But thanks to this routine that we will develop of calculating our answers, we're going to be able to derive some awesomely subtle results. Powerful, subtle results. You're going to like the result of it. So let me start by introducing the first very simple quantitative problem. where we will also practice graphing. Instead of just any demand, I'm going to introduce a particular demand curve. Now you will notice that starting today and for the rest of the session, we're going to be using only linear demand and only linear supply. Why do you think we're going to be only using lines as opposed to curves? Is it because demand and supply typically are lines? No. So why are we going to restrict our analysis to lines? I know, yeah. You nodded. Why do you think lines?
So we can, I don't know, that'd be a static market or a static price.
I like that. It's even simpler than that. Lines are simple to work with, right? They're very easy. Let me show you. We will work in this example with a demand curve defined by an equation. P equals A minus Q. How would you graph demand curve P equals 8 minus Q in this graph? Does anyone know? Easy, guys. This number 8, this constant, gives you vertical intercept. That's where you start. Okay? This number in front of Q, what is the number in front of Q?
1.
Is it 1? It's negative 1. Can you see it there? We don't write minus 1Q, but that's basically what it is, right? It's minus 1Q. So it's negative 1. That number, negative 1, gives you a slope. Have you guys taken any math where you talk about slopes? What does a slope negative 1 look like? Like that, exactly. How steep is it? As steep as you showed, or steeper or less steep? Okay, guys. By the way, those of you who haven't taken this is calculus. You're familiar with calculus, right? Derivatives, integrals. This is to do with derivatives. Raise your hand if you enjoy your derivatives part of calculus. You actually liked it.
Easy.
It's easy.
He doesn't know how to do them.
Awesome. Okay, guys, those of you who either didn't take it or didn't quite enjoy it, it really is easy. If you ever find it difficult or confusing, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's not because you're too slow to catch it. It's because mathematicians have a way to fool us. And instead of explaining simple ideas in simple English, they're explaining simple ideas in a strange foreign language. Not even numbers. Numbers we could understand. But the formulas and variables, right? Guys, it's basically just a foreign language. So let me tell you, let me show you how. Well, by the way, I mean, you say it was easy. Can you recall what is a derivative? Yeah, you.
Oh, so
What is a derivative? Do you remember?
it's like kind of like the marginal
Okay.
when it comes to
Okay.
price.
All right.
Um,
So let's say you have a function f of a variable x. By the way, none of you are responsible for what I'm about to show you. I'm just going to show you the difference between the language, foreign language mathematicians use, and English. Okay? So again, let's say this is a function of x. This is a derivative of function of x, right? Is that the notation you use?
Yes.
Can you tell me what that is? How's that defined?
is it fx over x?
It's defined as various ways to do it, right? One way is f of x plus h minus f of x over h, letting the limit, right, of h go to 0. That makes sense? Everybody understands this? You feel comfortable? You know exactly what derivatives are? You really do?
Somewhat, yeah. I'm just have to say, I have to just refresh it in my mind.
Okay. All right, guys. So this is a foreign language. Do you want to know what this says in English? Derivative is a slope. Do you understand the word slope? Have you ever seen a slope? Have you seen a slope going up? Have you seen a slope going down? Have you seen a slope that's flat? No slope. Cool.
It makes
Then you
sense.
know what derivative is, because that's exactly what derivative is. Does this look like a word slope? Ah, it is slope. It's just written in some strange cryptic hieroglyphic language or something, right? But it is a slope. So derivative is a slope. And this simply assigns a number to a certain slope. Where should I put it? But hold off for a while and just use this space to show you slopes. What is the slope of this function?
0.
0. It has no slope. It's flat. Squiggly arrow means slope. Slope 0, right? This has a slope, right? 45-degree line. This formula assigns a number. What is the number of this slope? Guys, it's a slope 1. Do you remember the high school formula for derivative? Rise over 1, right? So when you have something rising 45 degrees, let's even simplify this. Something rising 45 degrees, right? This is the rise, and this is the run. When this is 45 degrees, what is true about rise and run? They're the same size, right? If this is a 45-degree line, rise and run is the same number. So rise divided by run will be 1. There you go. Okay, that's all there's to it. So slope of a 45-degree line, a rising 45-degree line, is 1. What do you think is the slope of a negative or falling 45-degree line? Negative. What do you think is the slope of a line that rises halfway between 0 and 1? 1/2. Halfway between 1/2 and 0, 1/4. 1/8, 1/16, and so on, right? Make sense? Very good. What's the slope of a line that rises between 1 and vertical? 2. Between 2 and vertical?
3,
4. Between 4 and vertical?
6,
8. 8 and vertical? 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 5 below, right? And so on and so forth. What's the slope of the vertical? So 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 1,000 something, 28, 2,056, infinity, absolutely. Is anything steeper than vertical cliff? No, it's infinitely steep. This has no slope. This has all the slope there is. And all the slopes in between have numbers assigned to it based on that formula. And the same downward, of course, with a negative sign, right? Negative 1/2 and so on and so forth. So that's all there's to it, guys. If you understand that, you know your calculus. Congratulations. At least that half called derivatives, right? Now, quantity price. Remember, we have a demand curve, P equals A minus Q. This number gives us vertical intercept 8, slope -1. How steep is that line?
45 degrees.
It's a negative 45-degree line. Since it's negative 45-degree line, where does it hit horizontal axis? At 8. It's a q-axis, you're right. It hits it at 8, right? Now, do you really need to know derivatives and slopes to find these numbers? No, there is a simpler way. The bottom line is a vertical axis intersect is basically a price, right? It's a number on the price axis. So to find that number, you're asking, what is the number on the price axis at this point, correct? What do we know about that point? If we don't know that number, is there anything else we know about that particular point? Well, what's the value of quantity at that point? What's the value on the quantity axis at that point?
0.
0. Oh, so we're asking, what is the price number corresponding to quantity 0? If quantity is 0, 8 minus 0 is 8. That's where that number comes from. That makes sense? Very good. How do we find this number? Well, we're asking, what is the quantity, right? What is the quantity at this point? What do we know about this point? Price is 0. Well, if price is 0, how much is the quantity?
8.
8 minus how much is equal to 0?
8.
8 minus 8 is 0. There you go. And you find those two intercepts. Okay? Don't worry, you're going to get homework. You can play with 10 or 15 graphs and enjoy your demand and supply curves. Very good. So this is demand curve. Supply in this graph is given by by P equals 2 plus Q. 2 plus Q. Where's the supply curve going to start on the vertical axis? At 2. It's going to have how much slope? Plus 1, so it's going to be a 45-degree line. Boom. Done. Okay? Again, if you don't feel comfortable graphing like this, you can practice it on the square paper or whatever is your preferred method. Anyways, so we have a simple rising supply curve, falling demand curve. That makes sense? Now, the first task is to find equilibrium. That means to find equilibrium price and find equilibrium quantity, right? How do we do it? How do we do that? Any suggestions? Anyone knows what the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price are going to be in the market with this demand and this supply? How would you go about it? Say it very loud. Set them equal to each other. You mean it well. What exactly do you mean set equal to one another? Tell me what I should set equal to what?
Each side of the equation.
By each side, you mean literally each side? You mean it exactly well, just read. What would you set equal to what?
8 minus Q.
8 minus Q equals
2 plus
2 plus Q. Very good. Which side of the equation is 8 minus Q? Right-hand side of the equation or left-hand side of the equation? 8 minus Q is on the right-hand side, right? So it's right-hand side of the equation, and 2 plus Q is also the right-hand side of the equation. In other words, how are you going to solve for quantity? Set, yes?
8 minus Q, but that's the equation for P, so would it be the left-hand side?
No. It is an equation. It has a left-hand side and the right-hand
Oh, I
side.
see what you're saying.
Exactly. Okay. What's to the right of the equal sign is the right-hand side. What's to the left of the equal sign is the left-hand side. Very simple. Very simple. So basically what your colleague is suggesting, let's set the right-hand sides of the demand equation and the supply equation to each other, correct? Is that what you're suggesting? Yes, very good. Look guys, this is principles class. You cannot possibly go wrong. We're learning basics. So, 2 plus Q, right hand side of supply curve equals 8 minus Q. The right hand side of demand curve, right? So now we set them equal to each other. What's next? What do you suggest we do?
Add.
Say it with me guys. It's algebra, right? So let's do the algebra. So you're saying add Q?
Solve for Q.
Solve for Q. How would you go about that? Well, how would you solve? You say add Q. Add Q to what?
Subtract 8.
To both sides.
To both sides of that equation, correct? So add Q here and add Q here, correct?
Yes.
If you add Q to the left-hand side of the equation, what do you get?
2Q. 2 plus
2 plus 2 Qs, right? Because it's 2 plus Q plus Q, so it's 2 plus 2 Qs. What do you get on the right-hand side?
8.
8, because it's 8 minus Q plus Q. What's left is 8. Very good. What's the next step in algebra?
Minus Q.
Subtract 2 from both sides.
Subtract 2 from both sides. You subtract 2 here, you subtract 2 there. What is left on the left-hand side?
2Q.
2Q is equal to
6.
6. What's the last step of the algebra?
Divide by 2.
Divide both sides by 2. What's left on the left-hand side? 2Q divided by 2.
Q.
Q equals
3.
3. Congratulations, you just solved your first equilibrium quantity. That makes sense? Very good. Are we going to be doing this kind of algebra every single day?
No.
For the rest of basically yes, but really quickly, okay? We're not going to be playing with algebra like that. You're going to be quick. I mean, this is something you guys learned what, in 4th or 5th grade or somewhere, right? Maybe even earlier. And I understand many of us are rusty. That's what the homework is for. You're going to be practicing this and getting quick at it. So we found out that equilibrium quantity is 3 units. So in this market, 3 units are produced and sold. Can you tell me what the price of each unit is? What's the equilibrium price? How did you find that out?
8 minus 3 and 2 plus 3.
Correct. You substitute that quantity 3 into either demand curve for quantity or supply curve for quantity, right? If quantity is 3, 8 minus 3 is 5. 2 plus 3 is 5. There you go. So we found that equilibrium price is $5 per piece, right? So we found out what the equilibrium in this market is. Can you see what equilibrium looks like? Equilibrium are 2 numbers. Equilibrium is not a point where two curves meet. It's not an intersection. Equilibrium are these 2 numbers. That makes sense? Very good. So now we have equilibrium. Do you have any questions about how anything was calculated? Fairly straightforward? Okay. Does this strike you as something difficult? Isn't this something you've been doing many years ago? You may have forgotten that, but you've been doing this kind of fun stuff way back when, right? In grade school. Why are we doing this stuff here, guys? This is supposed to be college. Well, it turns out this very simple tool, this very simple procedure can be used to analyze the effects of all kinds of policies. So without much ado, let me jump straight to the first policy we're going to analyze. Let me first capture that information here. We have equilibrium quantity 3, equilibrium price, so price $5 in this market. Let's clear this and step towards the analysis of the first policy, guys. The first policy we're going to be analyzing of several in this session is called price ceiling. Price ceiling. It will be followed by price floor. Intuitively, what do you think price ceiling and price floor could be? What kind of a policy could it be? Let's start with price ceiling. What do you think price ceiling could be?
The max.
A max, a ceiling on price. Imposed by who? Who do you think can impose a ceiling on price?
Producer?
Possibly by what, but why would they?
So that they will not, what is
Look,
this?
we're talking about policies, government, right? We're talking about the government imposing certain restrictions on the market. And one of those restrictions could be imposing the top or the maximum price allowed by the government.
Yes.
Why do you think the government might ever be tempted to impose a price ceiling on the market?
Taxes.
Say it again?
Taxes.
Okay, taxes are a policy. Tax is a policy, and we're going to study tax. We're going to study tax, next week, possibly even this week. Imposing maximum on price is just the very simplest idea. Why the government might consider restricting how high price can go.
I think to help the people so the companies don't overcharge them.
Yeah, not
Would
to
that
hold
make
the-
sense? If the government wants to quell inflation or simply stop prices from skyrocketing, the government simply issues some kind of a measure that prohibits anyone charging price higher than some limit stated by the government,
Yeah.
right?
It goes both ways with the lowest.
Say it very loud.
I say it goes both ways with the lowest price too, because I know with the tomato market, Mexico was selling them real cheap, and American producers were selling them too high, and they were losing people buying from them because they were selling them too high.
So did you hear what your colleague said? You were talking about cheap tomatoes from Mexico, right? Basically undercutting the prices of domestic producers over here. Is that what you're suggesting? Absolutely. It is one of the situations where we could apply this kind of analysis and we would learn a lot. I have to disappoint you, we're not going to get that far. This is a simple class introduction. What you're saying is much more sophisticated and much more interesting story. But it really doesn't have much to do with policy. It's imports and exports, right? Foreign competition, it's not something with the government. You're right, the government can restrict imports. The government can impose tariffs, right? In other words, all kinds of policies can be associated with the example you're suggesting. Honestly, we're not even going to get there. We're dealing with a much, much simpler case here. Simply, government decides that in some market, like this market, $5 price is just way too much. That's the price at which this market would settle based on demand and supply in equilibrium. Not higher, not lower, $5. In some cases, government might decide, now this is outrageous. We need to, as you suggested, to help people, right? We need to help people. Help people with what? The affordability of it. If the government feels like this is just so unaffordable for families, we need to make it cheaper. Are you familiar with any example of price ceiling ever being used in America? Anyone ever heard of rent controls in New York City? Yes or no? No? Yes? What you have? So what did you hear about rent controls in New York City? Say it loud so that everybody can hear that.
I've just briefly kind of heard about it. Isn't it like?
I can't hear you.
Isn't it like when like rent can be cheaper because the rent, like the government, so like people can afford the apartments and things.
there were some decades after World War II when the government in New York City decided that New York City was getting way too expensive for old residents. Old ladies, old gentlemen living in their old apartments. And the rent was going up and suddenly they couldn't afford it, right? And so they would be pushed by those rising rents, they would be pushed out of the city. They would lose the place of residence where they lived for decades potentially, and the government simply decided that's not fair. So the government imposed rent controls, meaning a certain upper limit on rent, and landlords were not allowed to charge more than that, so that those apartments remained affordable for the existing residents, right? Guys, this existed. It didn't exist just in New York City, but that was one of the examples.
Yeah, but they're still expensive.
And well, New York City is very expensive. I'm not sure how much rent control is left in New York City. I know that the policies are changing dramatically. But the fact is there was a policy like that. And yes, the purpose of the policy was to simply depress the market price. Because the equilibrium price was found to be too high, too expensive. So the government decides to depress that market price by imposing a price control, or price ceiling. Now, would you consider that to be a good policy? Well, it's certainly good for those residents who occupy those apartments, right? And benefit from that affordable rent. So would you suggest we should also consider something like that maybe in Jacksonville? Would any one of you guys use a little bit rent control where you live? No? You're all very happy with the rent you're paying? You'd actually pay twice as much if only you could? But nobody asks you? No? Okay, so you see, I mean, oftentimes tenants feel like, oh my gosh, yeah, I could use some rent control, right? So let's see how the rent control affects a market. Let's consider this market and impose a price ceiling. Once again, it's the same market with the same demand. P equals 8 minus Q with the same supply. P equals 2 plus Q. Okay? And now, instead of equilibrium, this market is controlled by the government. The government imposes the rent control in the form of a price ceiling. Now, if you were a government official who is implementing price ceiling, what kind of a price ceiling would you choose? Would you choose price ceiling, for example, $6 or $7? Would that be a meaningful price ceiling? You don't seem to be very...
You want to lower it if you're making
Well,
it.
oh, in other words, would a price ceiling 6 or 7 help anyone?
No,
What would be the impact of a price ceiling 6 or 7 on the market?
it just raised.
Would it?
Well, because now the landlords will be like, oh, well,
Now landlords are charging 5. That's the equilibrium.
yeah.
If the government suddenly shows up and imposes the ceiling, the maximum allowed by the law at 6 or 7, what happens to the market?
Wouldn't they make it 6 or 7 to get the max of what they want?
It almost itches to say that it would raise the price, right? That the price ceiling would actually make price go up. No, guys, it's even simpler than that. It would have absolutely no impact. Nobody would notice. Price would remain 5.
Yeah, but if somebody do.
Everybody knows. Let me give you an example. Imagine the government. How much does Ford Mustang sell for today?
Like a
That's
VA.
what- yeah,
The good one, whatever.
The good
Like
$30,000-$45,000. Suppose the government in Jacksonville suddenly issues a measure saying that sale of a Mustang in Jacksonville in excess of $1 million is prohibited. No one is allowed to sell Mustang for $1 million or more. What's going to happen to prices of Mustangs?
I think it's fixed.
It's gonna be $30,000-$40,000, right? I mean, have you ever anyone sell normal stock new Mustang for $1 million? The kind that you're describing? No. And if the government says you would go to jail if you offer it for more than $1 million, well,
Okay, that's fine.
nobody ever thought about it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if you would have said Bugatti, that would have been different.
Say it again?
If you would have said a Bugatti, that would have been different.
Well, I'm not talking Bugatti, right? So the bottom line is, if the government considers imposing a ceiling, the max price, the government is not going to impose that max price above the current equilibrium price, right? It would have no impact on the market. So the only meaningful or effective price ceiling is the price ceiling imposed below the market price, below the market equilibrium price, right? Because the purpose of that ceiling is to do what with the price? Reduce it so that it becomes more affordable for those tenants or whatever, consumers, right? So your pick, where do you want it? 4 or 3? Let's make it 3, okay? Let's make price ceiling 3. Price ceiling $3. Price ceiling $3. Tell me, what's the impact of the price ceiling now that price is not allowed to climb above $3? What is the impact of that price ceiling on the market? Let's take it step by step. First, tell me, how do you think firms, suppliers, feel about that price ceiling?
Not too happy about it.
They're not really happy with it because way back when they were allowed to sell at the equilibrium price $5 and they were willing to produce 3 units. At price $3, do they bother producing 3 units? No. What's the quantity supply? What's the quantity supply at price ceiling 3?
A lot less.
Well, you tell me. Price is $3 now. What is the quantity supplied? 2 plus how much is 3? 2 plus 1 is 3. See, quantity supplied is 1. Firms are willing and able to only produce 1 unit at such a low price. On the other hand, how do you think consumers, buyers, feel about that low price $3? They love it, right? Way back when they had to pay $5, now it's only $3, it's a great deal. How much do you think consumers are willing and able to buy? What is the quantity demanded? How did you find out? Which curve tells you quantity demanded? Demand curve. So when price is 3, what is quantity demanded? 8 minus 5 is 3, correct? So we found out that at the price ceiling 3, quantity supplied is 1. Firms are willing and able to produce only 1 unit, but buyers are willing and able to buy 5 units. That's the impact of price ceiling on the market. My question is this market in equilibrium? You're saying no, correct. Why not?
There's a huge deficit.
Because there's a huge deficit. Quantity demanded and quantity supplied are no longer equal to each other. Can you see that? In equilibrium, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. This is no longer equilibrium. So what does that price ceiling do to the market? It knocks it out of equilibrium, right? Here it was in equilibrium. Equilibrium price 5, quantity 3. Here, at price ceiling 3, the market is no longer in equilibrium. In fact, the market now ends up with huge deficit of how much? 4. Exactly. In other words, buyers are willing and able to buy 4 more units than what the firms are willing and able to supply, right? Very good. Now, my question for you guys is this a good policy or a bad policy? Would you support that policy or not support that policy? You guys are saying no, no. Anyone in this class would?
We
Yeah,
would, yes.
You would? You would.
For the sake of,
Why?
For the company now.
yeah, for the sake of like
Everything
everybody
they're gonna
not
buy all
being
is like
affected.
left for.
In other words, those of you who are saying no have a reason to say no. You're saying yes, you have a reason to say yes. So why do you guys not like the idea of the price ceiling?
Because they'll be able to sell, their units for $3, a unit for like a little
Yeah.
while, but eventually it's just gonna
In other words,
go so.
you guys are thinking as landlords, right? In other words, you're picturing yourself being a landlord. And if you're a landlord renting your apartment for probably not $5, but let's say $500, and then you are forced by the government to only lease it for $300, that's offensive, right? That definitely makes you worse off. On the other hand, you kind of like the idea. Why?
Because it's a cheaper price, why not?
Because you are the lucky dude in a cheap apartment, right? In other words, you're thinking as a buyer, consumer, absolutely. Yes?
So why would there be a possibility to where the government would want to knock the market out of equilibrium? Like I could understand if the price was too high and they put up price ceilings and hey, look, this is the equilibrium price. This is where the market works best. So,
Did you hear your colleague's question? Why would the market ever consider why would the government ever consider knocking the market out of equilibrium? Why wouldn't the government instead focus on imposing ceiling where there's equilibrium
Like you
so
said,
that it's in equilibrium? Do you have a take on that?
The government considers equilibrium price too high.
That's it. Nobody has to intervene in the market to keep the price at the equilibrium. You don't need the government for the market to end up in equilibrium. So that's a little bit crude, a statement. But the bottom line is well-functioning market will establish equilibrium on its own. Of course, you might ask me, what is a well-functioning market? And of course, well-functioning market requires some government, but not determining price. I feel like I should specify what I'm talking about, and then we'll take a break, okay? Here's the deal, guys, because we're going to be talking about government a lot, what the government should do and what the government should not do, okay? And so it's very important that we understand these distinctions from the very beginning. I said a minute ago that for the market to establish equilibrium, no government is needed. The truth is, no government price policy is needed. Government does that on its own. Do we need any government whatsoever for markets to actually do what they do the best? And the answer is absolutely. How do we know that market economy doesn't work the way this picture shows when the government is absent?
Is that what we talked about, Somalia?
Say it again?
Somalia.
Of course. We talked about a country that some people might consider to be a perfect example of the smallest or least amount of government intervention. It's a country where there is no government intervention because it's a country where there is no government. And it happens to be a country of Somalia, right? That a couple decades didn't really have a government. Now, is Somalia the greatest market economy in the world because there is no government intervening in the markets? No, it is probably the poorest, sorriest place on earth, suffering from perpetual famines and total mayhem, right? It's absolutely horrific. So why is it? Why can't Somalians, without the shackles of the government, create a fantastic market economy? Well, you can go to Somalia and start a farm. Do you have to apply for some kind of a government license to start a farm? No, there is no government to apply to. So you start a farm. You can hire people. Do you need to pay payroll tax to the government? No, because there ain't no government. See, there's no regulations. You can hire people, they come, they work for you, you grow your crops. Then you finally have the harvest. Suddenly a bunch of armed thugs shows up, kills you and burns or steals your harvest. And then, of course, you file complaint at a local court, right? Except there ain't no court. You can dial 911, except there's nobody on the other hand picking up. In other words, there is absolutely no law enforcement. There's no law and order. There's no enforcement of contracts. In other words, can you really produce your crop and sell it in the market at the going market price? No, you're not going to make it to the market, right? So, yes, for markets to properly function, like what is pictured in this graph, you have to have law and order, you have to have enforcement of contracts, judicial system, and so on. So you have to have these government functions, right? But you don't need government telling anyone what the price should be. The market figures that one on its own. The market sets that price based on equilibrium between supply and demand. That's what markets do. If left alone, suppliers and demanders, suppliers and consumers will settle on the price 5 as the equilibrium price. This is why the government does not need to set ceiling at 5. If price 5 is fine, the government doesn't need to do anything with it. Price will be 5. The reason why the government imposes ceiling is precisely, as your colleague said, because the government finds the price unacceptably high. Why would the government find it unacceptably high?
Hyperinflation.
Could be that there's inflation and prices are rising so fast that people can't afford them, so the government is trying to contain or something. In other words, whatever the reason, whatever the story behind it is, the government decides consumers are adversely affected by this high price, and that's why they deserve new lower price. Whatever leads the government, to declare that, that's what the government does. And as a result, some people benefit. Like someone who ends up, leasing a cheap apartment. And some people are losing. Who do you think loses from this policy? Landlords, obviously, right? Because landlords are now, or suppliers, producers, are forced to sell at lower price, yes?
Well, wouldn't you also be a loser since there's a deficit? There's four less apartments. I mean, there's a deficit of 4. So if he's the lucky guy and he's renting an apartment for $3, and then I'm trying to go rent an apartment from this landlord, hey, sorry, there's no more left.
Absolutely. Think of it also this way. In equilibrium, yes, price was 5, but there were 3 families leasing apartments, right? Are there still 3 apartments being available after the price ceiling is imposed? No, only one landlord supplies 1 apartment, right? What do you think happened to these 2 families that used to lease at the price 5? Their apartments are no longer being leased. They lost a place to live, right? So the policy was designed to help tenants, to help those who buy, consumers. It does help some consumers who are lucky enough to buy that small quantity at that low price. But it may harm other consumers who simply can't buy now because there's not enough supply. And of course, it also hurts suppliers. So you see, this policy has ambiguous impact on the market. It helps some people, it hurts other people. What do you think? Are other policies going to only help everybody or only hurt everybody, or are they generally speaking going to help someone hurt someone else?
Yeah. Third option.
Typically you will see that every policy tends to help someone hurt someone else. Would you support that policy? Some people would say, yeah, I would support it because it helps some people. Others would say, no, I wouldn't support that policy because it hurts some people. And then I tell you, okay, every policy helps some people and hurts others. that's not a good ground, that's not a good grounds to refuse a policy. So how do you think we're gonna go about deciding whether a policy is a good idea or a bad idea?
If the benefits outweigh the damage.
In other words, it's not enough to ask who is hurt and who benefits. It's a question of how much, right? In other words, how much benefit does that policy generate for those who win? And how much harm does the policy do to those who lose? And then you can weigh pros and cons. And you can actually compare them in quantitative terms. Does it make sense? So it's not just empty chat about who wins, who loses. It's about how much. That's why, guys, we're doing quantitative analysis. And that comes after the break, okay? Can you please stop it? Thank you very much. It's that big button that's staring you right in the face. Yes.